Shenanigans on a Mondays with Mick edition of Timeout with Higher Power Sports. And happy to be back. We had a 1 week hiatus because it was all my fault. I think we had some weather, and then we had I had a car issue, and then I had
Which car?
I had not the Mick-mobile.
Long story, but I
Not the
warranted some
Mick-mobile.
concern on my part.
Yeah. I'll tell that story right now. The
very
car
good.
I travel in for Higher Power Sports is Mick's old car. Mick was generous enough, and some of you have heard the story before, but has been generous enough to let me use his car when I go out and do my speaking and things like that. And so no, it wasn't yours. So
It's a 66 Mustang convertible. It's worth about 65 grand. So that's
well, then I took the wrong car out of your garage because that's not the one I have.
okay.
So we're happy to be back, and happy to be back at Shenanigans. And we'll get to the state tournament, but happy they let an O'Gorman guy in Shenanigans because they had a big Roosevelt party here last night, I heard. And
Okay.
so they were very kind to let an O'Gorman guy in. So happy to be back at Shenanigans and in the back room here, and it's always really nice here.
Shenanigans is a great supporter of athletics, high school sports in particular, I think. And you could say West Side, and that's part of it. But I think overall, this is a place that has always been very positive and very supportive of high school sports in this community.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of places like that around Sioux Falls that, just really like to support, the local high school kids, the local colleges, and it's fun. And it's kind of fun, that's one of the things on social media now. You get to see the different establishments and who they, kind of support and, the good things that they're doing as well, rather than, I don't know, well, that's a Packer bar you used to hear anything. Now you kind of,
You can find out.
Absolutely.
You get the information.
Yeah. But like I said, you don't have to be a Roosevelt fan to be welcomed in here. You can be an O'Gorman guy or a Washington guy. They'll let you in and have a good burger. So, Mick, what do you got? What do you got working on?
Well, I got an interesting story that I'm starting on tomorrow. There's an organization called Rep One. It's kind of a sports agency for pro athletes in several different sports, but Sanford's affiliation with this group, collaboration with this group is they've become more engaged over the last few years, and now they're starting a golf academy. It's in Irvine, California, and so I'm really going to try to angle toward needing to go out there to write another story. But they're getting kind of their Sanford Power Golf Academy set up is headed out there too now, and so it's going to be kind of cool because there's going to be some more traffic as far as professional athletes that are going to, I would guess, through this are going to know a little bit more about Sanford, and Sanford's going to know a little bit more about those people. So I see it as something that's going to be very interesting for all of us sports fans in town, in addition to everything else. But that we're just going to see a continued collaboration intensified with this group, Rep One, and Sanford Power Academies and all that. So it's going to be kind of cool.
Sounds awesome. One sports story that is, well, quite a few sports stories going on that interest me and kind of involved me, so to speak. But one that interests me because of my Parkston, I live in Parkston, and Riley Reef, who was released by the Vikings, I think he's going into his 10th year in the NFL, signed with the Bengals. Was interesting, people were talking about maybe the Chiefs or, re-signing with the Vikings. And then it's interesting that how all of a sudden, that the Bengals want him. And I saw an interview with him, and, he seems excited to be there. And, he talked about it being kind of a Midwestern blue collar city that that's kind of him. So wish him all the best, because that's exciting for, a South Dakota kid to, well, he's a man now, a big man, And, being 10 years in the NFL is something pretty special.
Well, I think that if you look at his career overall, he's got a lot out of his career, and he was, he was not like this that it was crazy that he made any NFL team. He came into the league with a big reputation, but he's done a lot with it. And I think if you look at last year, and he had a really nice year with the Vikings after maybe at least one year where they weren't sure about it. Injuries, I'm sure, figured into it. But last year he made himself, some more money.
Yep, absolutely.
He would be somebody that you'd look at signing based on how things went for him last year.
Very good. Let's get right to our guest then. Brian Henchen.
Yep, Henchen.
Which is, they call you Hank, so I don't know how they get Henchen Hank, but Brian, it's awesome to have you with. Brian is a sports reporter and sports journalist with the Argus Leader, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys. It's good to see you, Tim. Good to see you, Mick. How you guys doing?
We are awesome as always. We a lot of people go up and down in their lives. We just keep going up, man. That's all. There's nothing that ever goes down in our life. No, thanks for asking. We're doing great today, and we're excited to have you. Brian, I know you worked with Mick for a few years when you first got to Sioux Falls, but let's take a step back and talk about Brian, and then we'll talk about the state tournament that just happened, and all three of them maybe. But you're awake at least, from the weekend and all those games. But Brian, how'd you get to Sioux Falls, South Dakota?
So actually, I don't even remember applying to the Argus Leader for a job. I went about a year after college of working a part-time job at a deli establishment, McAllister's Deli in St. Louis, and also writing stories covering the St. Louis Blues and St. Louis Billikens for a website and radio station called Inside STL, CBS Sports 920. Did that for a couple of years. And in the process, kids will find out when they get out of college, you're just sort of sending out mass applications and applying to anybody who's hiring that even remotely interests you. So it's stretched from small town Kansas to places all the way up in Alaska and everywhere. And I actually applied for the SDSU job to replace Terry Vanderveck, the job that Zim has now. And when I got the call from Mary Carroll, one of the questions she asked me was if I'd ever been to Sioux Falls before. And I said, no, but I've been to Mount Rushmore. And there was this fun little minute-long pause after she informed me that Mount Rushmore is actually on the other side of the state where, I'm holding the phone away from myself, swearing myself out for screwing up another job interview, and you blew this one, you idiot. But they liked me enough, I guess, that they brought me to town. And Mick was actually one of the guys. Mick and Dave Nicholson brought me to lunch during my interview, and that was my first experience with Mick there. And started out on the desk with the Argus Leader, and staffing changes and everything sort of evolved my role into what it is now, which is sort of a little bit of everything, as Zim and I like to say, but primarily high school and USD.
So even after that lunch with Mick, you still made the trip to Sioux Falls to start a career here?
Mick was the selling point. They said, here, you go out to lunch with this guy and you're going to be blown away. And they say, you're going to move to that big city and you're going to sit down with this Garry guy and you are going to love it. And I'll be danged. They were right. And it was great. And then I met Zimmer, a little different, a little different pace, but it's great. It was, it was a lot of fun. I really love working with Mick. The times that we get to spend together hanging out too is great. And I can't say enough for both him, Zim, and Stu, and all that they've done for me over the years.
So you mentioned you were in St. Louis. Is St. Louis home, or where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was actually born in South Korea and adopted over to St. Louis and grew up in St. Louis my entire life. All my family, everybody's back there. I have twin sisters and a little brother as well back home who still live in St. Louis. Sisters were a lot smarter than I and picked more lucrative careers, and job stability, I guess, was another selling point of what they've gotten into. But no, it's been different moving away from home. It isn't my first time moving away from home. I lived at Mizzou, went to school at Mizzou for a couple of years, which is about 2 hours outside of St. Louis. But no, Sioux Falls, moving out here it's been different, but I've loved it. It's been different in a very good way, and it's been a phenomenal place to start.
And you mentioned, you're born over in South Korea, and then are your sisters also from South Korea? Or are they sisters from a family here?
They're actually from Vietnam. So I'm from Seoul, South Korea, which is the capital of South Korea. I have a brother from another part of South Korea, and then my sisters are from Vietnam. And actually, they were a set of triplets when they were when they were born. But the biological family decided that they could keep one and then put the other two up for adoption. So that's how we end up with Sarah and Megan. So it's pretty awesome how it's worked out. And honestly, growing up, that just kind of, the way it was never really a big deal for me, and I don't think it was for my sisters either. That's our family. You know what I mean? The fact that we were adopted never really mattered or factored in or made anything different. And growing up, I was fortunate enough, that it wasn't either with friends or anything like that either. Like, oh, you're different because you're not, everybody in your family looks different or anything like that. So I was very fortunate that way as I look back on things.
That's a sounds like a very interesting, upbringing, and what a great, gesture. I don't know if that's the right word, by your parents, we had Alex and Morgan Roby on, and they were talking about, they're in the middle of a process of adopting a young girl from India, and what's all in, going into that. But for your parents, four kids from different places, and what an outstanding role models you must have had.
Yeah, and honestly, speaking to the process, I was old enough to kind of remember bits and pieces of when we got my brother and just the different things that went into it through the adoption agency, different functions and things like that, where the families were all together. And my aunt and uncle actually adopted two children as well from over in Korea, different parts of Korea. So I kind of remember seeing bits and pieces of it growing up, and yeah, just everything that goes into it and the time. But I mean, you're right. It's such a loving gesture to adopt children like that, and to bring them over and give them a chance at life, more or less. Everybody's circumstances are different, but for me, it's been awesome. Obviously, I love my family so much; they mean the world to me and everything. And it's a beautiful thing what Alex and his wife are doing too.
Yeah, that's cool. Mick, obviously, Brian very well. Any questions that you have, jump in there all the time. But
just a little bit about your folks. I mean, what do they do? What, if you could, I don't know if you could tell me, but what motivated them to take on this? I mean, you got to have a big time spirit to take on this, to adopt one kid, let alone, take it on to the level of that they've taken it on.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know. We never really dove into the why as much. It's just, one of those things that's the way it is. But in terms of what they do, my mom's a nurse. She works with the babies over at St. John's Mercy Hospital in St. Louis. She's getting close to retiring. And then my dad works at St. Louis University. He's the director of radiation safety and is sort of a variety of things between the school and the hospital, between education and helping out with instances obviously involving radiation and that sort of thing. But yeah, the question as to why is an interesting one, and not necessarily one though that we've ever really sort of gotten into. Because it honestly, it just never really mattered. What mattered is that we're sort of together, and that we're a family, and that's just how it is, I guess.
Do they ever question your choice of careers?
All the time.
So
what do you do? So Brian, where do you live now? At family functions. Well, I live in South Dakota, and you can see the interest meter kind of going down. What do you do? Well, I cover sports. You see it surge back up. Oh, what sports do you cover? High school sports, and mid-sized college, and then it just all bets are off at that point. Nobody really gives anything of what I have to say. So, but no, they've been very supportive. I joke and kid, that I'm the disappointment because I went into a job where there's no such thing as job stability and the pay is terrible, but they've been very supportive and even tolerant of my decisions in life and the decision to chase a dream that I had when I realized that you're not an athletic kid, you're not going to play sports. So the best way to be around it is to write about them.
Well, let's talk about that athletics. You're right about them. Take me back to Brian growing up. Did you play athletics? Were you involved in different sports, or how did that go as a child?
Yeah, growing up, I played soccer, tried baseball for a little bit, wasn't coordinated enough for that. My dad was really worried that I was going to get hurt, so he pulled me from baseball. But I did a lot of like soccer. It was nothing super competitive. It was just sort of parish CYC. I don't know. I guess CYC isn't a thing up here. It was just sort of, I went to a Catholic grade school, and that's, they had a soccer team, obviously, and we just played that against the other parishes in town. And then as I got into high school, I tried out for freshman football, was too small for that. I'm sure Zimmer will enjoy hearing that. I was too short, not athletic enough for football, but I did try to run track, wasn't very good at that. And I organized a baseball team, just sort of not a pickup or a Legion League, just sort of a select team or whatever you want to call it on the side. And I played with a few buddies, which was a lot of fun. And then, no, it was just mostly covering sports. Hockey was really big at my high school, so covered a lot of that. Senior year, I tried ultimate frisbee with some buddies, and then did flag football in college. But really, most of my experience in athletics has been covering athletics and sort of viewing it from that side. Because again, growing up as a scrawny little kid without the most athleticism, it didn't really lend itself to playing at a super high level like some of my siblings did.
So, and Mick, I'll ask you guys both this question. You got into writing about athletics. What were, when you were growing up, was it, the sports teams in Minnesota and, in the St. Louis area that you really enjoyed, or were you really into a college team or the high school team? What kind of got you interested in, I'll start with Mick on this one. What kind of got you interested in?
Well, I go back to about 7 years old, and I needed more. I had this interest in it, and no conversation was going to be enough. It was going to satiate me on Minnesota Vikings or the Minnesota Twins. And so I started picking up the newspaper, and probably 7 years old at Star Tribune. We got it every morning. I guess it was just the Tribune back then, but and that got me going. I mean, Sid Hartman taught me how to read, basically. I mean, to the extent that I needed to know how to read, but it was all information that, and I don't know what it would be like now when you can watch any baseball or basketball game you want. When you could always watch the football, the Vikings were on every week, but otherwise it was like once every 2 weeks the Gopher basketball team would be on, and the Gopher football team would never be.
Yeah.
And you had like this huge television network. It was some kind of syndicated outfit that once in a while you'd see a little bit, you'd see the Gopher Purdue game or something like that. So it was newspaper. I had to read that thing because I needed to know this stuff. And it was funny because you go back in the day and you didn't okay, so Butch Weiniger was a big deal. This is way back, but he was the hot prospect for the Twins as a catcher. And you didn't know what he looked like. You didn't know if he's white or black or anything until like halfway into the season. I mean, because you didn't see him. And but things like that were different. But I keep going back to, I needed that newspaper because that's going to give me what I need, because nothing else will give me what I need. And I think that was ultimately sports, and that fascination with sports. I couldn't get enough of it. And just, you had to read the newspaper. You want to know what the hell was going on. That's kind of how it worked for me.
Awesome. And Brian, is there a team or teams, pro, college, that really sparked your interest?
Yeah, it was Cardinal baseball growing up, and they were pretty good. I grew up around the home run chase in '98. That's kind of like the first major sports thing that I remember. There was the '98 home run chase, and then Kurt Warner and the Rams winning their first Super Bowl in '99, 2000. Those are the two big things. And I remember getting the Kurt Warner special SI commemorative edition for my mom, and that's sort of when I fell in love with football and sports in general. And then as I got older, being the huge dork that I am, my dad still has it in a Word document. I wrote and laid out this little story on Bo Hart, former St. Louis Cardinal, really scrappy, which is our fun way of saying just a white guy who's kind of athletic and doesn't really do anything exceptional, just exceedingly average. But I just loved him to death and wrote a little story on him in a Word document about, however long it was, and printed it out and proudly presented it to my dad. And then as I got older and we had to do research papers in class and whatnot, I remember I did one on the St. Louis Cardinals, and I was insistent on using a typewriter because I thought typewriters were just the coolest damn things. And I pecked out about these little index cards about yay big. I picked out about 20 or 30 of them and had them in this little tiny binder with just notes on all the Cardinals World Series wins and everything. And I compiled it into this 20-page Word document report, again, complete with pictures and everything. And I was just the biggest dork. That was sort of what it was that got me into writing and loving it. And I think it's just grown from there. And as I got older and continued reading the newspaper, and guys like Brian Burwell and Joe Strauss in St. Louis were really big influences for me. It just sort of blossomed from there. And then in high school, running the newspaper, our hockey team, like I said, was really good. And having the opportunity to cover them and doing some video work, and it was so fun to me being able to do a little bit of everything, be it Photoshop or not really taking photos, but taking video and the interviews, and then the writing part, obviously. And then layout as well. And it all kind of blossomed there from just covering the St. Louis Cardinals and watching Rams football games. And then Mizzou, when they started getting really good, I started locking in. And it was, like I said, just being a dork and loving to write is kind of what spurred it on. And it's merged well, I'd like to say, with my love for sports and passion for sports.
So you guys both mentioned, you mentioned Sid, and you mentioned a couple guys that, kind of those guys that, you kind of looked up to, or you learned, you read, things like that. Was it the way they wrote, or was it just the stories they wrote? Because, as somebody that's not a journalist, not good at writing, not good at English, were you intrigued by the sports aspect of it, or more of the writing aspect of it?
I think for me, it was probably the sports aspect of it. And then the writing came along with it, sort of. And then just in terms of people that I wrote, I think it was just the accessibility, because I didn't start getting like Sports Illustrated until I was older. And at the time, when I was really reading and starting to pay attention to things, Burwell was a big columnist in St. Louis with an extensive history of, covering some more social issues in that from his time up in Detroit, and I think too down in Atlanta. And then Joe Strauss was the Cardinals beat reporter, and obviously the Cardinals are a huge deal in St. Louis, especially during that time when they started winning a lot of games. So that was kind of why I gravitated to them. Was just Burwell was such a respected figure in the community as a writer, and Strauss was just so dang talented at his job. I think that's kind of what drew me to them. I'm not sure if it was the same for Mick or not.
Well, when I mentioned Sid Hartman was not a good writer. He was a gatherer of information, but it was perfect timing for me, because an 8-year-old could read Sid Hartman and know about 80% of what he was talking about. So that was the initial. And then after that, once I got to high school and I really started thinking about putting together words, I started paying attention a lot more to like Pat Royce, and at the time it was like Larry Basson and Jim Klobuchar and people who can really put their words together. And I started paying attention to all of that. Joe Suchere was another one who I don't agree with him politically on anything anymore, but an incredible writer, an incredible sports columnist for a long time. And that it evolved as I went along.
And you both have mentioned this, and the sports writing, it's a tough business. You've got to work hard. You don't make a lot of money, and with the way things are going, there's less and less of those jobs out there. Where do you guys see, any thoughts on where we're evolving to? Will newspapers be extinct, or will there always be print paper, or, what are you guys' thoughts? Or don't you want to get into that, Mick?
Well, I want to hear what you say. I don't care.
I was just going to say, Mick, I'd love to hear what you say first, because we've both been through the layoff side of things. Me during a time back at St. Louis, and Mick more recently. I got laid off from Fox Sports Midwest when they decided to cut their entire digital staff and just go to the TV side only, right on the cusp of me moving from the desk to getting an actual writing job potentially. I don't know. I think that the industry is changing quickly, but I'm curious to see if it's too late. Obviously, I think print, without question, is going to go away. I'm honestly surprised, and I imagine Mick feels the same way, that the Argus still prints 7 days a week. That shocks me, just based on the moves that they've made, the slashes that they made. I mean, everybody sees it. Our sports section, our newspaper, some days is like a pamphlet. And I don't think it's too controversial or critical to say that that's just the way it is, because there isn't as much money in print, because the people who read the newspaper are dying off, or they're not as interested. then you shift online. And I think the big problem with doing it online is that it started out free. So people think that that's how it should be, is that it should be free. Whereas if you would have started like the athletics do, and you make everything subscriber only, so you have to pay for it, people are already preconditioned to understand that, oh, this is a necessary service that I have to pay for. This isn't just some sort of, I guess, handout is the word. You know what I mean? Um, so that's interesting. Now, that being said, maybe people are starting to come around. I know that our subscriber numbers are starting to go up, which is great. But it's just getting that buy-in from everybody, and it's just a constant struggle of how much can you really push people by putting stuff behind a paywall to draw them in, like that hurt factor that makes them hurt enough that they come in. But it'll be interesting. And I think another big problem with our industry is the corporate side, obviously, where it's just one big company buying up a bunch of newspapers and then slashing down staffs. We see it all the time across the country. I'm not going to name specific companies, lest we get in any trouble, but it's really sad what they do. And it's really sad, especially in smaller towns and cities like a Sioux Falls, for instance, where we're losing to Mick, Garry, and a Stu Whitney, and even, Dave Mack, Jill Callison, Steve Young, just all these different people that have gone. It's to the point now where I'm the 5th or 6th most senior person in the newsroom, and I've been there for 5 years. That's unbelievable. I was number 20 or somewhere in the 20s or 30s when I got here in terms of seniority, and in just 5 short years, it's gone to where I'm top 5, and that's unbelievable, because I have no business being the most senior person in a newsroom for a community that, yes, I love, and yes, I've tried to ingrain myself with, but I don't have the same institutional knowledge as a Mick or a Zimmer or a Stu or anybody that's gone before me. People that have been here, and in Zimmer's case, grew up here. So there's going to be, and there are a lot of challenges facing this business, and I think there probably is a road ahead, but it's going to be really ugly, and it's not going to be great. And I think that there's a lot of recovery to do from the last presidential regime, without straying too much into politics. But the fact of the matter is, he attacked the media a lot, like him or not. That's just an objective fact. And I think that a lot of that, it gave green light to everybody on both sides of the aisle to just attack the media even more than they already do. So there's a big credibility issue, and feeding into that credibility issue too are people who aren't very good at the job and don't care that they're not very good at the job. One of the things for me growing up, cycling back to that question, is I remember in college when Mizzou was hiring a new basketball coach after Mike Anderson left. I was reading and following really closely guys like Vahe Gregorian at the Post-Dispatch and Bernie Miklasz. I mean, they got one report wrong. They got some bad information, and I just watched and saw how badly and how hard they took that, because their credibility means so much. And then you see somebody else, a blogger or somebody with a Twitter account, throw something out there, pretend that it's legit, or even a national person pretend that it's legit and that it's wrong, and there's no accountability for them. They don't feel bad for it at all, and that's a real problem. I think that that's a byproduct of social media, and that credibility and trust, it doesn't mean as much as it should. And I think that this is all a big rambling way of saying that it all feeds together, and it paints a really dark picture of our industry. And that's one of the things that I always tell kids who are interested in journalism. My first recommendation is don't do it. It's not worth it. My second is, if you're going to do it, you need to care a lot about what you're doing. You need to really love it. And you need to give, can we swear? I'm sorry, I've come really close to saying, the S word, but you really need to give a shit about what you're doing, and the trust that you have with the people in the community. And that's something that I've always taken great care on, because you don't want to be wrong, because you don't want to lose that credibility and trust your readers, because that's everything. And one of the ways to get things back for these young reporters and save the future generations is for them to get that back, and for that to matter again to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Mick, your thoughts on, obviously you've had a great career at the Argus, then are now kind of on the other side of it. You're writing for the Sanford, that is a lot more online, so to speak.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's exclusively online. I think if you just go back to every time that there's been a change in media, just a shift, continental shift in media, where you go to TV, and that changed radio, and like FM radio changed AM radio, and those things changed newspapers to a certain extent, and now the internet is changing all that came before it, and it all still exists. I mean, you still have radio, you still have FM radio, you still have television, but it was never the same. It changed, and they had to figure things out. And I think that's where the newspaper is right now, certainly because of what we do. It seems more dramatic, but I think in terms of as far as the internet's concerned, and the level of just this dramatic shift, and for it to affect everything to this extent it has really made this one a little bit different. And I think, I think we can be confident that you're not going to be able to get the newspaper at your house anymore, but you're still going to need writers to report on things. But it's going to be different, and it's going to be different in the number of people who do it, what they get paid to a great extent. It's just going to be something where, in the bedrocks for the people who are in it, like Brian, you're going to have to justify that this is something you really like. This is what you want to do, and not get so worried about the rest of it. And I think early in my career, I couldn't believe the money part of it. And I had dopes that I went to college with, and they're doing very well. And I hope none of those people see this. I'm not talking about Dan or Mike, okay? But the rest of them, yeah, I'm talking about. No, but it's just something that you have to decide. Okay, well, I'm employing the Argus Leader, or I'm employing the Austin Daily Herald here, and if I don't want to do it anymore, then that's me. I got to figure this out and come to some peace with the wages here, and decide, who the hell cares? This is what I want to do, and I'm going to become comfortable doing it this way. And the day that I'm not, I got to do something else. And I never made that decision. But it's a definite part of it, and there's reality that sets in. And if you have a family or children, and all these other things can be concerns that you have to take in any job you do. But I think in sports media, to a certain extent, especially at the level that in smaller communities, it's definitely something where you have to make that decision and have some peace with it.
And Brian, you mentioned a couple things that struck me. People need to, you've got to register and pay for it. Okay. And I think, again, you look back, this is what the music industry was going through 20 years ago. And, now print and journalism is kind of going through that. But then you also mentioned the credibility factor. And, I think that's so difficult in our world. Like you said, anybody, heck, look at us two, we could say anything we want, and somebody could listen and believe what we're saying. I could say Mick's a really nice guy, and people out there could believe it,
His thing. Yeah.
So it's really interesting, how we're going to move forward. Learning from the music industry and learning that stuff's probably going to catch up sooner or later. The people that, the younger people are going to say, well, this is the way you got to do it. My parents, when we told them, this is how you're going to get the paper, well, why do I got to pay for it? It's on my computer,
Yeah.
But, the younger people are accepting that, or that's the way they grew up, so to speak.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting too, along the lines of credibility, and that just on the national media side, when they're just sort of parachuting in on things and not necessarily giving the full story, and biases and whatnot. And just, again, I feel like, and I'm biased, but I think that further magnifies the importance of local news. The Ravensbourg thing is a perfect example. When that started to break, when the interrogation tapes were leaked, NBC News, CNN, all the national people just sort of parachuted in. You're not going to get a full picture from them. You're going to get it from Joe Sneevy and Daniel Ferguson and Jonathan Ellis, who've been grinding on that thing for months and months on end. And I'm curious to see if there's going to be a realization, even just within communities, I think, to start of, hey, it is really important work that they're doing, and we should support it, and we should want that content. We should, we have to pay for it, but it's worth our dollar. You know what I mean? For reasons beyond just let's support a very important component to our democracy. And then too, that's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum of any Tom, Dick, or Harry can say anything they want and people will believe it. So maybe I'm hoping that it puts an increased emphasis on local news, and that helps drive it. And two, I just sort of a sidearm to this entire conversation, and Mick brought this up and made me think about it. I'm interested to see how the internet impacts the TV industry. because local TV news is in the same spot as print media. It may not be as obvious now, but they're navigating the same perils as we are with advertising dollars and, watching local news. Why would you sit and through a newscast for the weather when you can just pull it up on your phone now? Or when you want to see a sports highlight, you can just pull it up on your phone instantaneously, like ESPN has gone through. So it's a really interesting time to be in the industry. It's kind of scary, it's kind of exciting at the same time, but yeah, it's an interesting time moving forward.
Absolutely. That's good stuff. That's, you know, a lot of industries are like that, get the one thing another thing you mentioned was, big companies buying, the little companies, around here. It's the big farmers buying up the smaller farmers. And, how are we going to navigate through this as a state, as a nation? And we'll get through it, but there'll be bumps and things along the way. And very interesting. I want to bring up, if you don't mind, the social justice issues going on in our world. Mick brought up, Larry Bird. You know, when Larry, before social media, or or Butch Weiniger,
Yeah.
You didn't know if he was white or black. Larry Bird, I don't remember the exact story, but when they played Michigan State in 1979, I think if it wasn't Magic Johnson, it was somebody on the team, was hearing all this stuff about Larry Bird. And when they saw him, they were shocked because he was white. They'd never seen him before. And they just assumed he was a black guy. And, now obviously with social media, everybody knows a lot more about people, but, with the social injustice and things going on, that has gone on forever, very difficult time in our world as well. And, obviously you mentioned you had a great childhood growing up and stuff, but, even in South Dakota, you walk into this place, you look different than I do,
Yeah.
how do you see that, maybe it's a loaded question, I guess, but, how has it affected you in the last year? And, what can we do?
It's interesting. I've had a really wonderful experience, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on a show where South Dakotans are listening. I have, and maybe it's a byproduct of living in Sioux Falls, where it's maybe a little more progressive than other small towns might be. But even when I go to small towns to cover games, and I don't know, maybe it's just from working at the Argus that it's clear that I'm there to cover the game, or something makes it different. I don't know. But I haven't really had my negative experiences with race have been few and far between, and I've been fortunate in respect. I know that other people living in other parts of the state haven't been quite as lucky, and have had to deal with things, especially here in the past year with the coronavirus, of people staring at them in Walmart and that sort of thing, which is troubling to say the least. Um, I think, yeah, I'm assuming this is kind of where you wanted to go with it, but just with the stuff happening nationally with the violence against Asian Americans, it's really troubling and it's heartbreaking. And after what happened in Atlanta, I still haven't had time to process everything, but it's really, really sad, and it's aggravating that it took this long for people to come around on it, because you hear athletes like Jeremy Lin talk about things that they've gone through, and I hear stories from other people in this state, like I said, and what they've had to deal with. And it's really sad that we've kind of lost our way and forgotten how to treat people. Not everybody, just a very small group of people that can cause a lot of pain and hurt. I don't know. It's a very interesting time. I was fortunate, like I said, to grow up with the things that I dealt with then. I just sort of chalk up to kids being kids. Like saying Chinese are doing the eye thing or whatever, because it's what kids react naturally. They aren't going to grow up to be racist all the time. Some of them are good friends of mine now. That's just the way kids are. But what's happening now with violence and just attacking people just because of the way they look, be it verbally. And then today I saw another rash of people. A woman was beaten with a pipe outside of a university, I think it was, because she was Asian, and he said he was on route to just beat up Asian looking people. I mean, that's really messed up, and it's really sad. And what can be done about it, I don't know. We need to be more aware, probably, of how we talk. Not us, meaning this trio, but just people in general. I'm not an overly sensitive type of person, but clearly words like China virus and Kung flu and that sort of thing. And before I say this, let me be clear, I didn't even realize or understand fully the harm that those words can cause. But clearly it all just works together and gives racist assholes a voice and gives them the idea that this is okay, or gives them other people that may not have thought that way initially, that this is somehow a specific group of people's fault, when in fact it is not. And when in fact that is a load of crap. And I apologize for rambling here, but like I said, it's just so much to comprehend, and it's heartbreaking to see that. And on some levels, it's scary, because while I've had a really positive experience in life, that what's to stop somebody who's along those lines of just being a crazy, horrible person from doing that to me, or to my sisters, or to my brother, or to somebody that I care about? You know what I mean? And yeah, it's good that it's getting the attention that it is now. It's just really, really sad that it took this much, that it took people getting killed and people getting abused, even when people were getting beat up in the streets. That didn't seem to be enough to get the national media attention that it deserved right away. And to be quite honest, it's really frustrating when you see everything else that's happened, and other things that do get the attention, be it just some stupid celebrity thing or some other form of injustice. They're all created equally in this. You know what I mean? And we should all have the bandwidth as a society to address them and deal with them. We should just start caring about this because people died. We should care about this because it's freaking wrong, and because it's the right thing to do. And I was raised and really believe in treat others as you want to be treated. And I'd like to think that that's a good way to live life, and that a lot of people feel that way too. But clearly there's a number of people that don't, and it's really sad. And hopefully through all this hurt, we'll find a way to suss out those people, and they'll be, sent back to their holes, and they're, wherever they are, and just in darkness, and they can just continue living in the underworld where they belong, because those are not people that belong in society. And if that's controversial and you have a problem with it, I could not care less. Hate me, block me on Twitter, spew your whatever you want at me, that's fine. Those people don't deserve a spot in society, quite frankly. They should just be shipped off to an island. But I don't know. It's a lot to take in. It's been a lot to process. I kind of saw and was getting caught up on stuff as I was getting ready for state basketball, and haven't really had time to think about it. I have a little bit today, but it's a lot. I'll be honest. It's a lot. And for me, it's a weird thing, because I've grown up, I'm kind of a thick skinned dude, and I'm not easily offended. Mick knows I like to joke around about whatever and anything. But when it comes to things like this, when there's hate behind it and it's not in good natured fun and there's violence involved, it's a totally different thing, I think, than anything else.
Yeah. I think it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
To treat others the way, you would like to be treated. But we're seeing it. And I don't know if it's maybe because it's more out in the open because of social media and things like that. It seems like we're seeing it more and more. And like you mentioned, it's not just words anymore. It's the violence. And, again, it seems so simple, but still we're in such the world's always had complex problems, but it's very complex as well. But I still think it's very simple,
Yeah. And the social media component is really interesting, because it's a double-edged sword. Because while you're giving folks the ability to expose it and to see it, you're also giving the bigots a venue and a spot to spew their hate. I mean, I wrote this story about the Washington boys in the all-black starting five, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Again, we're just giving them a venue. I scrolled through the Facebook comments, and dear Lord, they come out of their holes and they get behind their keyboards because there's no repercussions. Earlier in the year, I wrote a story, or I didn't even write a story. I just pointed out that Roosevelt football players were taking a knee during the anthem. And again, I turned off the replies, but people still found a way to just spew their hate, be it at me because they're upset that I even pointed it out. And that somehow makes me less of an American and not a patriot, or whatever stupid things they think. Or they go attacking the kids, which in my mind, under any circumstances, is unacceptable. But then you look at it on the other side, the Asian hate thing got going because of social media, where people were tweeting out, and Olivia Munn and some other celebrities started to bring light to it. And, we're sharing stories in the LA Times that had taken notice of it and was getting it out there. So you kind of have to take the good and take the bad with social media. And something else too that I wanted to point out with my time in South Dakota that I've kind of been thinking about is, it's never been about me being different at all. I'm just a guy there doing a job, which is great, and to me is important. You know what I mean? Like it's been, again, just overall for me, just a wonderful experience. But social media brings out the worst in people sometimes, and that's where you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, social media, a lot of times you give that platform to people that disagree with you, or just looking for you to slip up I had a couple, things that I tweeted this weekend and stuff that, I didn't think was controversial at all, but, I got some replies on it that were, okay, that's not my intention at all. And then also kind of where we're at is, I posted a thing about O'Gorman and, how proud I was and, and then I felt the need to say, this isn't attack on any other program. Their programs are great too, but because you're just afraid that, oh, well, somebody's going to come back about, well, this kid did that, or you don't like that program, no,
Yeah.
that's not,
That's right.
proud.
Yeah, you're right. It is. It's like you're living on a razor's edge because there are so many people out there, and this is going the other direction. So many people out there that are looking to be offended by something that you say, anything at all, anything they can do to take attacks at you, and it's so annoying. And just that's why on Twitter, like you have to think through everything, and it's so annoying because, like you said, you say one positive thing about a team, and suddenly you hate the other guys. It's sort of like a running joke that I have on Twitter sometimes. If somebody will say it, they like, oh, I like hamburgers, and I'll say, oh, well, why do you hate hot dogs? Because that's how Twitter works. It's just so stupid. You can't just appreciate a nice thing for somebody. You can't appreciate that you said something nice about O'Gorman, or that I said, wrote something nice about, I don't know, Roosevelt because they won. You know what I mean? Or like if I would have congratulated O'Gorman on the great season, which they had, and again, we're going to talk about, but suddenly I'm biased. And the kneeling thing is a perfect example. Just because I reported something and showed something that somebody didn't like, suddenly I'm the asshole. And suddenly, just because my reporting may not line up with their viewpoints, again, objective reporting doesn't line up with their viewpoints, it's a problem. And it works the same way with opinions too. Just because I like this team and they don't like that team, suddenly we have to be enemies. And it's so stupid. There's no nuance, no discussion anymore. And it's a problem. It really is. It dumbed down our society. And that's why Mick had it right, where Mick just sort of stays off of Twitter a lot. And I'm jealous that he's able to do that because my gosh, it takes years off your life. COVID hitting last spring was the best thing ever because once I got through the breaking news, I just got to stay off of Twitter for a long time because I knew anything that was going to happen was going to come to me in a text message and not on Twitter. And gosh, it makes your life better when you're able to get away from social media. It's such a dark place.
It is.
Absolutely. Well, and Mick, assuming you've seen it kind of evolve too, because, when the print paper was big, you were writing for the Coyotes. Whenever there would be a story about the Coyotes, I'm sure everybody called in. Do you guys hate SDSU?
They had to call or they had to write. They couldn't even have email at first, the first 10 years or so. So that was in hindsight, those were the salad days. Those were but and then for me, it was that when these websites and the fan sites would start showing up, and all of a sudden you came to the realization, and your family had to come to the realization that people could make up names and they had impunity. They were bulletproof and they could do whatever they wanted, which initially to me was upsetting. And I would Google my name and go, who's covering me up today? And it was, I was not a national figure or anything like it, close to that, or even purposely controversial ever to any great extent. But then, you go back to for a family thing, and it's like my sister would say, yeah, somebody doesn't like you out there. And at first it drove me crazy. And then, you kind of go, okay, I'm not going to Google my name anymore. Let's start there. And then not care about the rest of it and accept that this is now part of the definition of what you do. And then the Twitter thing now, it can get much more malicious than it would have been back then. Hell, half the things that people said bad about me, I would guess ultimately they were right. And thanks for reading, but it's
yeah. And I have a love-hate relationship with social media because, like I mentioned, some of those things, but for me in higher power sports, it's my biggest tool, because it is free. And I can reach a lot of people. And, so it's been very good for higher power sports. But so it's very an interesting dynamic, like,
Yeah.
probably anything, but it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's how I got out there and kind of, sort of established myself in the community, is just tweeting out videos on Twitter, sharing stories on Twitter, observations on Twitter, game updates on Twitter, that sort of thing. It is such a necessary tool. For as many bads as come with it, I should highlight the good. The good too is that it makes everything accessible. Suddenly, I can connect with a kid out in Rapid City, Stevens, or share a story that they might not have seen otherwise out on Twitter, and it takes off on Facebook or Twitter, and it takes off over there on that side of the state and spreads around. And just the instant update factor as well. I mean, it does so much for you, and it's such a necessary tool for the job, but it's also such a weapon. It's like you said, it's such a unique thing.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to the weekend. We've mentioned it a couple times. You were out at the AA boys basketball tournament. I was out there as well. And, some takeaways. Let's start with the games themselves first, and then we'll get to some of the stories. You mentioned Washington, and obviously we'll talk about Matthew Moore's probably, but, let's just talk about the games. Did you sit through all the games?
All the championship bracket games, quarters, semis, and then the third place game and the championship game on Saturday. I think the best place to start is probably that O'Gorman Washington semifinal. That was the craziest game I've ever seen. And I asked Derek Roby right after the game, he straight up said, I don't know how he won that game. They're down 10 with 6 minutes left. They couldn't hit a free throw. They couldn't hit a three-pointer. And I swear I tweeted it out. That's sort of my mile marker for that game was I tweeted out the free throw percentages and the three-point percentages for O'Gorman. And I swear they hit 2 free throws and drilled a three-pointer, and the game turned on its head. And it was insane what happened there. And just the way that they rallied, and it didn't feel real in the moment. It's like, oh my gosh, they're actually doing this. I don't know why I'm struggling with words to describe, but it was just so crazy the way that they came back and the number of bullets they dodged on the stretch where Washington pulled in 3 or 4 offensive rebounds. They had some turnovers in there, and still O'Gorman just kept dodging bullet after bullet and knocked off a really good team. And then, with Roosevelt beating Yankton the way that they did pretty decisively, I mean, that set the stage going into that championship game. I had no idea what to expect because the 2 hottest teams in the state. But I think in the second half there, we saw the Roosevelt team that everybody thought we were going to see all year. Just an unstoppably athletic group with so many weapons that can play so dang fast and has so many shooters. And then you factor in the size of the stage and a kid like Tyler Feldkamp, who just always seems to shine when those lights are the brightest. And you just had the recipe for success that most people thought they'd have. And for Mitch Begeman, Roosevelt's coach, I don't know how you couldn't, unless you're an O'Gorman fan, I don't know how you couldn't be happy for that guy.
Probably
Maybe an O'Gorman fan.
Yes, the O'Gorman.
Yeah, exactly.
That remember him playing there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from one win in his first season 5 years ago to state championship this year, I mean, it's incredible. And it's so cool the way that Mitch was able to stay the course and the amount of support that he received from other coaches. I was going back and reading a story that I wrote on him before they went to state 2 years ago for the first time. And he talked about a phone call that he received from Brent Deckert, who just called him from Brandon Valley. Brent just called him and offered his support and said, hey man, this stinks, but just keep grinding because you're doing something right, because you're winless, but your team is still playing really hard for you. And Mitch talked about how that helped him and just his willingness to stay the course. And then for those guys on that team to stay with him through those tough years when they first come into the program, picking up a winless program to get where they got now is just incredible. And then I suppose too, I'm just rambling here. We should touch on the quarterfinals. That Washington Aberdeen Central game I really thought was going to be the first big upset, but Eli Williams and the clutch factor that kid had that afternoon. He had the shot that he hit to win it. I swear to God, it hit right off the rim and it just went straight up in the air. It hit off the one side, and I thought it was going to go out, and he did too. Nelson said that he didn't have a doubt, but I don't know. And then it just miraculously fell through there. It was really good. Aberdeen Central is going to be great next year. The Mitchell Yankton game, the kid, I can't remember his name right now.
Prouty.
I don't know why, because I've written it
Prouty.
a dozen times. Yeah, Prouty going off from the perimeter was just awesome. The charge that Morris took was just such a gutsy charge. He picks up his 4th foul late in the game. So if he fouls out there, they're done. They're toast. I don't think anybody would dispute this point. For as good as Prouty was, Morris is always going to be the kid that stirs the drink. He steps into the lane and draws a charge on Mitchell's star, Caden Hinker, gets him out of the game, and suddenly it turns. And that's one of those plays that makes Matthew so special, is that he does some of those little things and he's so savvy about it. It's just incredible. And then the nightcap, again, 2 teams that had legitimate state aspirations between Brandon Valley and Roosevelt. And Roosevelt took it to him, and that should have been our sign. That should have been my sign right there that, hey, this team's pretty dang good, and they're going to be great. But man, what a fun tournament. It really lived up to the expectations. It was controversy free for the most part, which I really appreciated after the last trip to Rapid City. But yeah, just a great experience. But I'm really happy that that's our last time in that specific arena, because it is not nice.
Yeah, and that's right. The new arena that's will be done the next time the double A's go out there. So that'll be fun to see that arena. Let's talk about some the specific people or stories. Obviously the games were awesome. And you mentioned the O'Gorman and Washington game, and what a fun game to be part of. Obviously on the O'Gorman side, gut wrenching and heartbreaking for the Washington kids, but that was a game that people will talk about for a long time. But then, when you talk about what's really unique about the Washington situation in our state, the first team to start 5 black players in a state tournament, I don't know, outside of Sioux Falls, again, if it wasn't for social media, people wouldn't have any clue how diverse Washington, Roosevelt, and Lincoln are. But what a unique situation.
Yeah, it was. And it was so cool the way that it came together, because Akot had been on the cusp of starting all season. And he really had been. Nelson and Eli and I all talked about it, and just he was right there all season. But Joe Utek was playing so well at the beginning of the year, it just didn't make sense to mess with the flow. And obviously the results bear that out. But you go into the third place game, obviously last game of the season, all that, but you're also playing Yankton, and Yankton has some size. So suddenly it makes sense to get that piece in there. And they, don't get me wrong, they also knew the historical aspects of it, and they made sure to get that in there too. But it's funny how it all came together, in that it built up to that moment. And something that Eli said that really struck a chord with me and almost had me tearing up as I was talking to him was, he talked about how it was for kids who are from an underrepresented, minority kids at schools where they are underrepresented and they're getting picked on in that, but they don't feel like they have a voice. He said, I want them to see us on TV and understand that we recognize them and we care about them and that we're here for them too. And he talked about that, and I'm consistently blown away by kids' ability to articulate on such important matters. They're young people, but they're smart kids. South Dakotans have done a really good job raising their kids, because these kids have such a broad understanding of what's going on in the world. And for him to say that, and then to just the things that he spoke about, and I quoted, I think I pulled everything that he said and put it into that story, just about the importance of that and what it meant for them to be the first all-black starting 5 in a game, and to do it on that stage specifically, for kids to be able to see them and to understand that they're there for them, they're there with them, and that there are people out there that care. I mean, it knocks you on your butt. It really does. It's just such a cool thing. And then in talking to Nelson, obviously it's such a unique thing that they have there at Washington, just because of the makeup of their student body and their ability to just sort of bring it together. And it's unique. Like I said, it's unique to Sioux Falls, just the diversity that they have and how everything's a big family. And it was a theme too in talking to Randolph Kapai, and it was a theme too, and Mick knows this as well, in talking to Tupac Capella when he was at Washington a few years ago. And it's a really cool thing. And again, like we were talking about before, because I feel like we had to put this disclaimer on everything, it's not a knock at any other school. That's just a compliment to Washington. And that's not to say that similar things don't happen at other schools. It is a thing at Washington, and it's a great thing. And it's just like it's a great thing anywhere else. But they have such a unique situation, and I guess the way to put it is that they've used it to their benefit, and they've maximized the opportunities that presents, and the young men and women that they're putting out in the world. And what happened there Saturday, and I think it's starting to pick up some national traction, is just such an awesome thing. And the importance in the moment, the importance of that moment and the message that it sends certainly wasn't lost on anybody involved, which again, I just think speaks volumes about the job that everybody in the state is doing in raising their kids. And it's really cool to see.
Absolutely. Mick, anything on the Washington story that struck you, or?
Well, it represents hope to me. I think that this is the direction of the world, and it's a good thing in seeing examples of that. It's just like you say, if I was there, I would have been ready to break up too. You see that level of maturity in a kid, and over the years, it would be something that it would be like probably 5 times a year you talk to a kid, and it's like, my goodness, you probably do have some idea, but it's like, I would not have been capable of that level of thinking about anything at the age that it's something where no one told you to do this. You were motivated to say this and figure this out on your own. And what a great thing that is. And just you go through the profession, and when you're exposed to that sort of thing, it's like, okay, that's why I'm working for the money I'm working for, and I'm not complaining that much, is because of these situations. And it was great that that you explained a situation there, which is it's exactly that's the beauty of sports in a lot of ways.
And it speaks to the relationship that I think these kids have with their coaches, not just at Washington, but also Roosevelt and Lincoln and probably, Gorman. And I venture to say even the small schools too, and just that they feel comfortable.
It's like you froze up on us, Brian. You can maybe hear us, or you're probably still talking. We'll see how it. You back? Absolutely. The relationships. We lost you for a minute there.
Sorry.
No, that's completely okay.
Wasn't your fault.
Yeah, the relationships with kids. Obviously, I'm on the coaching staff over at O'Gorman and do a lot of work at Dakota Wesleyan with the football team and several other teams. But I think that's an underappreciated. Again, coaches and what gets highlighted a lot in communities, especially small communities, is the negativity between a coach and a player when things don't go right. But most of the time it goes right, and it goes way better than anybody thinks, and that has nothing to do with wins and losses. That's about the relationship getting better and understanding, why the coach is hard on you or why you're not playing. Most kids get it. But it's really fun when you have success on the court and you see those things too. And Eli, I don't know Eli well, but I've had a couple of coaches, college coaches, reach out to me, and I talked about how tough he is on the court and stuff. So I know he's going to Morningside. How lucky are they to have a kid like that to be in their program? That's pretty special.
Yeah, high class kid. I really love covering Eli, and honestly, he's not unlike a lot of other kids. Basically, everybody else that I cover, it's just a lot of high character kids. And in circling back to the coach conversation, I've yet to find a coach here that values winning over everything. It's never about that. It's always about developing these kids into good young men and women, and that speaks volumes. And it may sound cliche or corny or whatever, but it means a lot, because there are situations like this that are best addressed in that situation, in a sports situation, where the kids feel comfortable talking about it and life issues and that sort of thing. And across the board, you just see that it's just a genuine care between coaches and players. And that says a lot. Nelson talked about how him and Coach Tim Rack, his assistant, like they talk about this stuff a lot with the guys because of the makeup of their team and the diversity factor and just social issues and that sort of thing. Same thing with Kim Nelson and Roosevelt with the football team and coaches everywhere in the state. And you see it in these moments. You see it in moments when a kid's going through a hard time. And you hope that the parents don't get in the way a lot of the time, or that politics doesn't get in the way, because these coaches are human too, and they're good humans, and they're doing what they think is best. And maybe that doesn't always translate to wins and losses, but that's not necessarily the point of this. It's to make sure your kid gets a good education and, gets off on the right foot in life. And I'd say for the most part, I think the coaches in this state do a good job of that.
Absolutely. And with coaches, obviously Coach Deckert, over at Brandon Valley. We had him on the show a couple of weeks ago, and everybody's heard the story about his diagnosis with cancer and things like that. And came official this weekend that he's going to be stepping down as the head coach. That he's been 20 some years there. I can't say enough good things about Coach Deckert. And I can't imagine how emotional. I didn't get a chance to talk to him a lot this weekend. Actually, the most time I talked to him was on Wednesday and Thursday. So the last 2 days. But I can't imagine how special the tournament was for him, but how incredibly difficult it was as well.
Yeah, I talked to Brent briefly after the third place game before the championship, and we talked a little bit. He's still in great health. His scans are still coming back positive, which is great. But yeah, I think just the opportunity to see his daughter play is really important to him. And he kind of mentioned that in the interview with John Gaskins. We didn't get super deep into the weeds when him and I were talking, but just the opportunity to see his daughter play, and I think means a lot to him. And yeah, said, I mean, Brent, the impact that Brent has had on so many coaches' lives is incredible. Scott Langerock over at Harrisburg talked about how Deckard, I think, brought his team over to Harrisburg when they were really struggling during his first few years, and had them scrimmage against one another to show them what it looks like when you get to the level and what it's going to take to get there. Things like that. Again, him calling Begeman to talk to him and to help him through, because he knew Mitch from coaching against his dad when he was at O'Gorman. And then with Craig Nelson over at Washington, Craig coached for Deckard and came up under him. I know that Deckard's meant a lot in his life as well. It's just so cool. And to see it work the other way too, where Deckard's impacted all these lives, and with what him and his family are going through, he's really, I've written this a few times, but he's so reluctant to be in the spotlight, but that hasn't stopped any of the sport coming in, especially from the coaching community, and just the things that they've done, be it the t-shirt drive in AA, where everybody, even Sturgis, who didn't play Brandon Valley this year, bought shirts to wear for their games, and just how cool that was. We saw it during the postseason as well. Just things like that is incredible. And Deckard's going to be missed. But I'm glad that he's going to have the chance to watch his daughter. I'm glad, good health and all that. And it's about time that Brandon starts getting some really positive news, because if there's a community that deserves it, it's certainly Brandon, between what's been going on with Coach Deckard and Chad Garrow as well. I mean, they've been through a lot recently, and I really hope things, continue to turn around for them.
Absolutely. And then, let's talk about there was this kid that played at Yankton for a couple of years now. And, he's not going to be in a Yankton Buck uniform, but what a special talent. What a career. What fun it's been to watch him, throughout, arguably the best high school player ever to play in South Dakota.
Yeah. And the first thing that I always go back to with Matthew is just that, maybe a side that people don't see, is that he's one of the most humble kids you'll ever meet. In interviews and that, he's always been very down to earth, and his ability to handle pressure, even as a middle schooler, has just been incredible, because this kid has had all eyes on him, be it from the fans, the media, the opponents, and he's taken it all in stride. And sure, he's had some bumps in the road, just like everybody. Chris Haynes kind of alluded to that, but overall, he's handled it like a champ. And I think that just speaks volume about his maturity. He's always been more mature beyond his years. And then obviously on the playing side of things, he's been doing it since he was a 7th grader against full-grown men. I remember watching him go against like Canyon Bauer at O'Gorman, Seth Benson at Washington. 2 kids are going to play Division I football and doing that. Spencer Wagey, who's playing at North Dakota State, he's a graduate from Watertown. He told me a story about the first time that he played Matthew Morse, and he was assigned to this little 8th grader. He's like, okay, how good could he really be? First play of the game, Matthew spots up and hits a long 3-pointer over him. He's like, whatever, beginner's luck. Second time down, does the exact same thing right in front of him. He's like, oh my gosh, this kid's really good. And that just sort of set him off. But no, I mean, just in terms of watching him play, when that kid got going, it was unreal. And his game is so balanced. Be it, the assist numbers are great. He's a terrific rebounder. He makes those big plays on defense too. Just so much fun to watch. And something that Scott Langerock told me that's always stayed with me is that when he gets to Wisconsin, I think everybody's going to find out just how good of a shooter that kid really is. Because at that point, he's not going to have four dudes on him all the time, hounding him, beating the heck out of him. It's just going to be more one-on-one, because they have to worry about the other 4 dudes on the floor, So I think that the future for him remains so bright, because he's so naturally talented and he puts in the work to expand his game. That was the big thing when he won that championship his freshman year, was he wanted to work on his perimeter shooting a little bit more, and really stepped up in that area. And you just sort of saw that all come together here at the state tournament. It's unfortunate and a tough break that they missed out last year, because I think their team was really good. This year was a lot of young guys who came along as the season went, but they didn't just have the same amount of firepower to get by a Roosevelt. But take nothing away from him and the role that he played as a leader through his 6 years of basketball. Just an incredible young man, and can't say enough about him as a person or a player.
Yeah, I got to say this about Coach Haynes. Always great to have a player like that, but always very difficult too, because everybody expects you to win and everybody wants to see him score 40 and you win by 30. Well, very difficult to do, especially over 5 or 6 years like it's been. So I think he's done a great job with Matthew. I think he's done a great job with their team. You mentioned, the last couple of years, they had some older kids that really helped. And then to be as good as they were this year with those young kids was very impressive, I thought.
That was incredible. And watching them at the state tournament versus watching them at different points during the year, it was like night and day with just different kids stepping up. Rugby Riken, the sophomore, played really well and sort of came to his own. The Feezer kid came along nicely. It was so cool watching them grow. And then too, you mentioned Haynes, who's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Just his ability to manage the egos, because you're starting a middle schooler, a freshman over some seniors and juniors, and just their willingness to buy into that and be okay with that and to let that kid shine and understand that it's a team over everything else type of thing. I mean, just everything that went in to make Matthew Morse's career into what it was. Now that it's over, you kind of have a chance to appreciate a little bit more, but it's incredible watching the trajectory and the progression of his career. And it was so cool. And it was such a joy to cover over the years. And what he did for that community and that basketball program is just, I mean, it's off the charts.
Yeah. And, we're running along here, so we'll wrap up shortly, but I want to mention a couple things about the O'Gorman team. Obviously had a great run down the stretch. We're 6-6 in the middle of the year, thinking, what's going on here? We knew we had some talent. We'd changed our offense from last year, so it took some time, all those things. But again, it's those kids, they're so much more mature than we can describe. And they really bought into it and they really stayed together. And obviously we had, Eddie Myler, Ben Renshaw, Cade, Reese, all these guys that started for us and played a huge amount of minutes. But I want to tell you about Harry Huners. Harry played not even probably half the games, and most of the time it was the last minute, a senior, but he came to practice every day, played his tail off. His parents were there at the state tournament loving it, even though their kid wasn't playing. And there's a lot of Harrys out there. Don't get me wrong, again, there's Harrys at Roosevelt and Washington. And those kids don't get enough credit for what they do, but those are the type of kids that, again, how special you have to be that guy that I'm going to come in and work hard every day and not get any time. And so I got to give a shout out to not only Harry, but all those guys out there that didn't get any time.
The job that Roby did with that team was pretty remarkable. Just getting that turnaround, like you said, after the shaky start, the finish that they had won 11 straight games going into the state championship game. They knocked off Washington, the unbeatable juggernaut that was Washington, twice in the final month, the final couple weeks of the season. That was amazing. I was watching the first game on live stream at the second game. That was really impressive. And then to do it again in the fashion they did in the semifinals, it's almost impossible to beat a team 3 times, much less the way that they did it, but they did. And then while you're mentioning unsung heroes, I mean, Joe Lynch and what he did there in the quarterfinal win, coming off the bench and playing like he did, providing that spark. And then in the semifinal, working the ball inside with Myler and everything they had there. I mean, that was really impressive. And while we're talking about O'Gorman, we should probably mention the girls team as well. And I mentioned it on Twitter, but I definitely undervalued just how much they lost from last year on the girls' side when Emma graduated, with Emma and Carly graduating. That was a lot, and it showed during the season. They had some bumps in the road, but Izzy Moore, Hannah Ronson kind of got things on track, got them going. Reagan Riley played really well. Bergen Riley started coming on strong, and then Molly Abdouche out of nowhere just caught fire. I mean, that kid's going to be the next great thing from O'Gorman girls basketball. So kudos to them on a great season. And again, Washington, my gosh, that was probably the best girls basketball team we've ever seen with Sid and Jack Alinga. My goodness, the way that Sid can alter a game just by being in the lane, and Jack Alinga, what she did against O'Gorman in the semifinals during that stretch in the fourth quarter was just unbelievable. Just such a crazy group. And then obviously Rapid City Stevens and the run that they went on to get there. But so many cool storylines from this basketball season, and it was such a great way to bring everybody back.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Joe Lynch. Here's Joe Lynch's season kind of recap. Starts the first game, 2 games, gets hurt, doesn't play for a couple games, gets COVID, is out for another 2 or 3 weeks, comes back and doesn't play hardly at all, because he's working and he's so athletic that, it took him quite a while to get his legs back under him. And then to be one of our best players down the stretch, one of O'Gorman's best players down the stretch. Again, a kid that could have just said at Christmas time, he could have said, not worth working hard anymore because season's almost over and we're not winning very many games. But he stuck with it, and he had some unbelievable games down the stretch and had a great state tournament. So another one of those kids that
everybody was so excited for him after that game too. Roby couldn't get him out of the locker room fast enough for interviews. That was awesome. That was so cool and so good for Joe. And that dunk that he had at the end of the first half was pretty dang cool too. Aaron got a couple photos of that. That was pretty awesome.
Absolutely. You mentioned Aaron. How is she doing?
She's doing okay. She had a bit of a limp on Saturday after getting run over, but she had some good care there from Tiffany. So I think she's back. She was a little sore yesterday getting out of the car after the drive back, but she battled through, and God bless Erin for being a trooper. She spent more time with me probably than anybody should ever have to, but she continued to kill it as we covered, some 50 some odd games here over the past month or so, but that was good.
That's awesome. Well, Mick, anything else before we wrap it up tonight?
Hey, great job, Ryan, through that. And my goodness, with the USD, and you got a lot of irons in the fire, especially this time of year, but every time of year now with your assignments there, with the parameters of your duties. And I think you do a great job. And I mean, this guy in draft, he's got a motor. He's got a motor. And it's something that I recognized immediately when he started working there. Nothing but a joy to work with while I was there. And so glad that I got a chance to spend some time in your company over the years. You're a tribute to the biz.
That's awesome.
Need to catch up again soon, Mick.
Yes, this has to happen.
Yes.
Mick mentioned USD. Maybe talk real quick about, there's kind of a big game tonight.
Fairly significant game tonight, a little bit. It'll be interesting. Oregon's really big. They're really tall, but USD's got some good perimeter shooters. They got a great coaching staff with Dawn, that Dawn Puts White has built there. So we'll see. I think it'll be a close game, and I kind of lean towards maybe an upset. I know that Oregon's been dealing with some nagging injuries, including their starting point guard, and a couple of their bigs are banged up and were limited in practice on Saturday. So it kind of gives me pause for their chances, and then go on to play Georgia in a couple days and see what happens. But it's going to be an interesting game, and it's kind of unfortunate that it starts at 9:00 because I'm tired and getting old, and it's past my bedtime.
Yeah, I will probably be looking at your Twitter in the morning to find out the final score by the time that one's over. But what a great, obviously South Dakota State, great program as well. But what a great job Dawn has done there, and we wish USD the best of luck tonight as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun game. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Anything else before we sign off here tonight?
No, I think we about covered it. I appreciate you guys having me on and let me ramble like that a little bit. Sorry I got a little long-winded, but it's good conversation. Good seeing you, Mick and Tim, and it's good time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great conversation, and if there's anything out there that comes out, just be a good person. Just be a good person.
Yeah.
Work hard, even when you're not making much money. People in journalists know that. Coaches and teachers, we got a couple of coaches and teachers in here. They understand that problem as well. So, thanks for what you do. Thanks for everything you do for high school athletes in our state, because you shed a lot of light on a lot of good stories, and there are so many good stories out there. Again, not to bash social media, but a lot of times we don't hear all the good stories. We hear a lot of bad things or negative things. So we appreciate everything you do for all those kids out there.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
All right. Have a good night, and we will see you soon.